Hey guys, how you doing? Dr. Thompson. Welcome to Monday. Now, if you're from the Illinois area, we had great weather yesterday, but then today, not so much. So, hey, if you're jumping on right now, go ahead and say hello. Give me a wave. Hopefully, I will try to make sure that I can see everybody here. So, today what I want to go over with you is I want to go over why I never ice and why you shouldn't either. All right? Now, I know that when we say why you should never ice, I know that people are going to get a little bit emotional. And here's why. Even I, a long time ago, got emotional about this as well. So I remember growing up having tons and tons and tons of ankle sprains. So 7th grade, I broke my ankle. 8th grade, I severely sprained the other ankle. Freshman year, severely sprained another ankle. Junior year, sprained an ankle. Senior year, sprained an ankle. And then my sophomore year in college, I dislocated my ankle. So that hurt a lot. But here's the thing. Every time that I had that, everyone said, you must do RICE. You must rest, you must ice, you must compress, and you must elevate. So you must do those things in order for those things to heal. Now, that's what I did, and I kept getting injured. So I remember I remember a surgeon, when I went to the surgeon my sophomore year in college after having an ankle dislocation, literally the next day, I remember a surgeon, he actually started getting me to think differently about what was happening inside of the body. And I'm going to explain to you just in a little bit why you should never ice, all right? So I remember going into the orthopedic surgeon, and they did some x-rays. He's like, this doesn't look good. He said, but listen, Nate, you came in here and you wrapped up your ankle. It was all wrapped up. It was all compressed. You had just gotten done icing it. You were on crutches. You were trying to rest it, immobilize. And he said, in order to give you a fighting chance to be able to recover from this, even a little bit, here's what I want you to do. He said, take off that doggone bandage. He said, stop icing it. He said, and start moving it immediately. And I remember I was saying, but all the textbooks say I'm supposed to do this. But you got to remember, this surgeon had over 25 years of experience. And he said, you need to start working on getting it better immediately. And I said, well, what if it hurts though? He said, it's going to hurt. That's the job of the body, is to make it hurt. But you need to start moving it. You need to stop compressing it. Stop elevating it. Start moving it right away. So I remember he literally made me walk out of his office after I came in crutches, basically having an ankle that was just basically doing this, okay? But here's what's interesting, is that most people would have been incapacitated for 3 to 4 months. I actually got back to playing within 6 weeks, okay? And so we did actually exactly opposite of what the textbooks actually told us. And this is what's interesting, is because convention says you're supposed to do it one way, but actually when you start thinking differently, you start looking at why the body does specific things after any kind of injury leading to inflammation, you're actually going to understand that the body is doing exactly what it's supposed to, okay? So in college, I had an athletic training background. So what do you think we did? We iced everything. Someone had an injury, we elevated, we compressed it, we put them on muscle stim, we did all of these different things, and yet I found that no one was getting better. So even when I went to chiropractic school, someone's got an acute injury, compress, ice, rest, elevate, do all that stuff in the acute stages of inflammation, and so that's what I was taught. But I remember, and this was really hard, because how many times, guys, have you been taught something and you desperately, even when you discover that it's not even clinically right, you actually have a hard time changing it? And the reason why is that you tend to hold on to the things that you learn because you desperately want them to be right, and you desperately don't want to admit that maybe it was actually wrong. So I even had a problem with this as well. So let me give you an example of what I did a couple of years ago. So I want to say about 5 years ago, I was working out and I was doing wind sprints, like 100-meter wind sprints, okay? And man, I tell you what, I was flying. I was like missed my chance to be in the Olympics. I am pretty fast, and especially being in my late 30s, I think I have a future in sprinting. And so after the fourth or fifth, things were going really good. And then the sixth one happened, and I started to feel a little bit of a tinge in the back of my leg, in my hamstring. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm almost done with this workout. And then by the seventh sprint, I looked back and it felt like someone had shot me in the back of my leg, and I had basically had a severe strain of my hamstring. All right, so it hurt. Like, that is one of the most painful injuries. If you ever had that, a hamstring injury, give me a thumbs up. But I thought, okay, now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a little bit of an experiment, because what the textbooks say is that if you have a bad hamstring tear, you're going to be out for about 8 to 10 weeks. You're not going to be able to do anything for 8 to 10 weeks. And then they say wrap it up, ice it, take anti-inflammatories, do all of those things in order to try to suppress that inflammatory reaction. But instead, I did something different. I actually didn't ice it one bit. I didn't put any kind of compression on it. And what I immediately started doing is I started walking on it. And I started walking it. I actually started to try to stretch it out as much as I could. And that was all that I did. And what's interesting is, man, that thing got so black with so much bleeding in that area. My whole entire back of my leg was black. But what was interesting is that within about 10 days, I was able to actually start squatting again, and with very little loss of function or very little loss of strength. Now, was it going to take a little bit longer to heal completely? Yes. But I did it exactly opposite as what the textbooks actually told me. So, why should you never ice? Well, let me tell you why you should never ice, okay? Now, this is also true about icing or anything that you're trying to suppress the immune system response in response to tissue damage and inflammation. So, think of this. You sprain your ankle. So ankle turns in, you tear some of the tissues. So what happens is that anytime that you're tearing tissues, you're going to damage tissues and you're going to rip open some blood vessels. So what happens is you're going to start to bleed within that area. And so as that area bleeds, that damaged tissue is actually going to release some chemicals. And those chemicals are actually going to start floating around the body to say, hey, we got some tissue damage in our ankles. And so that tissue damage is in the chemicals that are actually given off. The immune system is actually attracted to those things. So as that stuff starts to bleed, the immune system can almost smell where that tissue damage is at, and it goes in and immediately starts to clean up the damaged tissue. Now, what happens if you immediately start icing? Well, what you do is you inhibit that process. So you actually inhibit the immune system's ability to go in and start cleaning up that damage. So it gets swollen. It's supposed to get swollen. It's supposed to get all kinds of bleeding into that area because it's there to form a protective cast while that acute inflammatory process is going on. So as soon as you ice, you are decreasing the innate system in the body of actually helping you to recover. So what happens when you compress? You are actually limiting the amount of blood that can get into that area and the immune system's ability to get in the area to immediately start cleaning up that damage. Same thing when you start to elevate. And then what happens when you start resting it? Listen, when you start resting it, you are immediately then starting to cause scar tissue formation in that resting position, which is why any time that anyone wants to cast an ankle sprain, which was done 3 times on me, what is actually one of the worst things that you can do long term. So we're taught to do RICE, but in reality, you don't do any of that. And this is also true when we have systemic inflammation that's going on. So I'll give you an example. When people eat their food allergies, when we do their food allergies, we test them, they have an inflammatory response. You can't ice your belly, but then what people are trying to do is they're trying to suppress the inflammatory response. It's the same thing when someone has a fever. Someone has a fever, that is actually inflammatory cytokines, or what they're called, which were immune system hormones that is actually telling the body that we have an infection, raise the body temperature, kill off the infection, and increase the immune system activity around that area to help fight off the infection. So when you give your child something for your fever, like an antipyretic or some kind of NSAID, Tylenol, aspirin, to try to lower that fever, guess what? You're interfering with the immune system's ability to fight off that infection. Same thing if you break a bone and you take non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Guess what happens? It actually decreases the healing of that fracture by 33%. So the very things that we are taught about inflammation, the very things that we are taught about icing, the very things that we are taught about rest and ice, compression and elevation, in reality, we are taught wrong. We're taught wrong. And the hardest thing for me was to actually admit initially what I was telling people when I was very young, I was wrong. However, there's nothing that's more important than, for me, is actually giving people the right information. So have I been wrong before? Absolutely. But here's the great thing. I am more than willing to say I wasn't thinking correctly, and I'm going to change my thinking. So let me ask you a question. Are you willing to change your thinking? Are you willing to start thinking differently? Because it's hard. It's hard to say, you know what, I might be wrong. It's hard to change your course. But let me ask you something. We have more inflammatory diseases than ever before. We have more heart disease, more cancer, more type 2 diabetes, more hormone issues, more infertility, more thyroid issues, more chronic autoimmunity, I mean, you name it, more issues than ever before. Yet it's all about trying to suppress the inflammation, and it has nothing to do with trying to find the cause. So, wrapping it up, ice, I never do it. I never do it. In fact, I know that someone's going to ask the question, what do you do if you sprain an ankle? Here's what I do for patients. I say, let it swell up, let's adjust it, and let's start to approximate the joints back into their normal position again. And what I want you to do is I want you to start walking on it immediately and start moving it safely. And we find that when people actually do that, their recovery is so much more quicker than what the textbooks say it's supposed to. So, okay, hey guys, I hope that makes sense. Ice, I never do it. All right, and neither should you. All right, guys, thanks for joining me. If you're popping on, make sure that you say hello. Make sure that you wave. I can't see anybody on here right now, so if you have a question, I'll go back and respond to it. Make sure that you share this. Coming up on Friday, we are doing our drawing for over $500 of supplements on Friday. So if you comment below and if you share, you'll be entered into that drawing. We'll be doing it Friday about 1 o'clock, right around there, but we'll also private message you if you win to let you know that you won. All right, guys, happy Monday. We'll see you soon.